Hello everyone, this is Ms. Lesensky and we're going to do a lesson about food webs and keystone species. So there's a document that goes along with this lesson where you will fill out some questions as we go. I'm also going to ask you at one point to draw some food webs on paper, and you'll take a picture and put that in your document. So get those things ready. All right, so we are talking about food chains and food webs. So this is what we would call a food chain. And you can probably guess how these organisms are interacting. We've got this bird that's eating the snake, that's eating the mouse, that's eating the plant. But what I want you to notice is that the arrow goes in the direction of the energy. The energy moves from the plant to the mouse, to the snake, etc. So always notice that when you're looking at a food chain, the arrows show you where the energy flows. Okay, so at this point, you're going to draw this food chain on a piece of paper. You can draw the organisms or you can just write their names, but show how they're connected. And we're going to add some more parts. Once you've drawn your food chain, and just pause if you need more time. Once you've drawn your food chain, we're going to label the autotrophs and heterotrophs. So those words are talking about how these organisms get their food. Auto means self. Autotrophs make food themselves, like plants that can do photosynthesis. And heterotrophs eat other things. So you can probably guess in this diagram, we have only one autotroph and the rest are heterotrophs. So label these on your diagram. We have autotrophs and heterotrophs, and you're going to define this in your document as well as label it on your diagram. I have some more terms for you: producers and consumers. And then within consumers, we can call things primary, secondary, or tertiary consumers. So a producer is something that produces its own food. So that's the same thing as an autotroph. A plant is a producer. Label that on your diagram. And then a consumer is what it sounds like. It consumes other things to get its food. So all our heterotrophs are consumers, but we can break that down into primary consumers, like our mouse. That is something that eats producers. All primary consumers eat producers directly. So they're kind of the next level up on our food chain. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers, and tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers. So the way we can abbreviate that is a 1 with a little circle here is primary, etc. So label those on your diagram. And then I want you to also add the ultimate source of energy in a food chain. As we trace this energy backwards down to the plant is making its own food, but it's getting energy from another source, which is, of course, the sun. So add the sun to your diagram to show that that's really where the energy is coming from originally. Okay, so that's your first diagram. I want to also show you what a food web is. It's very similar to a food chain, but more complex. In reality, usually we have food webs, not food chains, because all of these things are interacting with each other. So now we're going to draw a food web. I want you to draw your own food web that includes you and some things that you actually eat. So draw yourself a second diagram. It's a food web. And now don't draw like a hamburger, right? But think about the organisms that your food came from. So if you eat a hamburger, that's beef, you've got a cow. That is grains in the bun. So you've got things like wheat, lettuce. So try and include as many things as you can and make as many connections as you can. Pause the video and do that. Now, if you've already drawn your food web, I want you to trace the energy all the way back to the sun. So make sure you're going all the way back to producers and then to the sun. Now, it's possible you're a vegetarian and you don't have any other consumers on your diagram, and that's okay. Now I want you to label not every single organism in your food web, but just yourself. When it comes to this diagram, are you a producer? I'd be surprised if any of you guys can do photosynthesis, so probably not. Are you a primary consumer? That would be the case if you didn't eat any animal products. Secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and it can go on and on, quaternary consumer. I don't know what you call the next one, but you could Google that. So label where you are. We usually find ourselves highest up on the food chain like that when we're talking about ocean food webs. They tend to have more levels. You might eat a tuna that eats a smaller fish, that eats a smaller fish, that eats a smaller fish. And that's how you can end up pretty high up. All right, so now take a picture of those diagrams, insert that into your document so we can see your beautiful work. And now we're going to talk about predators and prey. So this may look familiar. We looked at this in class, how the lynx and hare populations are linked and affect each other. So imagine here, what if we were to get rid of one of these organisms? Right? If we were to get rid of the hare, it would greatly affect the lynx. The lynx may not be able to survive, and vice versa. So let's look at this diagram here. If the mice disappeared, what would happen to the plants? All of a sudden, there's less things eating them. The plant population might explode. What would happen to the snakes? All of a sudden, they've lost their food source. They might die. What about the birds? If the snakes die, the birds are going to die. Right? So there's a question there to answer about that. Now, if we look at a more complex system like a food web, let's imagine if we were to get rid of the fruit fly. What would happen here? So thinking about fruit flies and the mangoes, they don't really harm the plant actually. They just kind of soak up the mango liquid. So I don't think it would have a huge effect on the mangoes. What about this thrush? The thrush eats the fruit fly, but the thrush also eats dragonflies. So if the fruit fly disappeared, the thrush may not be doing as well, but it's still got dragonflies to eat. Same with the dragonfly. If its food, fruit flies, go away, it can still eat butterflies. The frog is going to be even less affected because look how many different things the frog can eat. The frog may not be affected much at all. So the more complex the food web, the less likely it is to just totally collapse when you take out one thing. If we look back at this, if you take out that mouse, the whole thing is going to fall apart. But the more interactions, the more arrows we have on our food web, the stronger it is and the less likely it is to all fall apart if there's a disturbance. So this is one big reason biodiversity matters. Which is something that we're asking you to talk about in your posters, right? In our biodiversity experiments, as you discuss in your background information why biodiversity matters. This is a great idea to include if you haven't already. So let's compare two different ecosystems that naturally, not because of humans in this case, but naturally have a different amount of biodiversity. A tundra does not have a lot of organisms that can live in there, that can survive. So a tundra is naturally less biodiverse. It has a few kinds of plants that can survive. They don't produce a lot of biomass, a lot of plant tissue for other things to eat. So this is a relatively simple food web. Here's a rainforest, and there's obviously a lot more in the rainforest than this. This is even a simplified version of the rainforest, but you can see there's so many more interactions, which makes the rainforest biodiversity, makes it more resistant to any disturbances. So this is an idea that we call ecosystem resilience. I would say the rainforest is more resilient than the tundra because it's more complicated. If something were to happen, let's say there was a flood that wiped out a couple of species, the ecosystem of the rainforest is more likely to be able to survive that than the tundra is. So you can think about natural disturbances that might happen, like natural disasters. You can think of human-caused disturbances that might happen, like habitat destruction, climate change. The more complex the ecosystem, the less likely it is to totally collapse when these things happen. And this is part of the problem with a loss of biodiversity around the world, is as some of these connections get taken out, it just makes it more likely that the whole thing can fall apart with the next disturbance. Okay, I want to show you this video where I'm going to end this video and have you click on the next link in your document. We're going to look at what happens in Yellowstone. For a long time, we kept wolves out of Yellowstone. And back in the 90s, they were reintroduced. I think it was the 90s. The video will tell you, believe it, not me. But we reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone, and a huge amount of things changed from there.